now I'm wondering, I'm a catechist. I volunteer in the parish, and obviously I've said yes, to sharing faith and to committing myself to being a disciple and to sharing a Christ-like experience with those that are in my faith formation program. But how do I translate missionary discipleship into what I'm already doing, or into this vocation of catechist? What do you think?
Accompaniment, accompanying others. Now, that can be challenging, especially if, I have this class, I have this group, I have this program, I have these things that I need to do. But I think if we look, for example, at the RCIA model, for example, the process in which people enter into the life of faith in our community, our Catholic community. And that's really an accompaniment model. It's very much one in which people are accompanied into the life of faith. Some of it's done very publicly, some of it's done usually in rather small groups, in one-on-one, in opportunities that are the whole community, that are those moments in which people can come to understand from when they inquire to mysticoaching. Mm-hmm. But then that seems to be not the model at times that we follow in other ways. And yet it seems to be the one in which Church is offering us as a way of accompanying people in their faith journey. And we're back to that Emmaus story, mm-hmm. where that accompanying could occur. Now, how does that happen? I think it can happen maybe not with a large group, most likely not. 1 or 2 or 3 people. But how do we prepare people maybe to do that within a community of faith? Could the catechist be the model and the teacher of how to accompany others within the community? I saw this occur in a church community that I was a part of, and they were able to, it was a shrine community, but it was one in which people were often coming and they were hurting and there was difficulty and so forth, and there were those who came regularly. And a number of them we prepared to be able to give ongoing welcome to people as they would come, and to invite them, not necessarily to stay because it was a pilgrimage spot, but an opportunity to welcome and to be accompanied in that moment in which they were with us. Now, sometimes that moment would last multi-weeks. Sometimes it would last even a few years. But what would that be like within a parish community? And I've seen it happen in parish communities where if people are prepared to be able to give that welcome, really taking and helping people be formed as missionary disciples, to go out even to the people within their own parish community. Start there, so as to prepare them so that they can keep going out into their daily lives. And so it becomes then, when we look at catechesis through a missionary discipleship model, it becomes then one in which we are encountering Christ, we're accompanying, we're deepening our life as community, but we are sent. It's not an enclosed community. It's a community that's always welcoming, expanding, and being sent forth so as to draw others into this life that we've experienced, in this communion of faith, something that St. John Paul II, for example, was very much focused on, the communion that we have with one another and with God. And why wouldn't we want to share that?
So that's really interesting. So the catechumenal model has the heart of catechesis, mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Which is what we've been talking about for quite some time.
Yes.
But really what you're saying, I think, let's just say I teach 6th grade, on Sundays. I'm mm-hmm. a catechist, and I say teach because it's a classroom model. But really, flipping that a bit and saying, well, how about we catechize people by offering a model of accompaniment as the main focus of our sessions. You know, how do I be present? How do I teach young people, that gifted accompaniment model? And I'm thinking about that, if a catechist was to focus on that, let's just say even for a couple years, kind of shift the parish model a bit, maybe from the traditional classroom setting. What would that challenge those young people to be, out in their schools, when they leave the parish? I think we have a very exciting model there that really now we've focused on creating intentional disciples, by modeling for them that breaking bread experience, by modeling for them Emmaus, so that they know, they recognize. But then, like those disciples, they want to go out and become and do and give. I think that's a very exciting model, and I wonder, then if the challenge, like you mentioned, it has to be a small, intimate group. So how do we look at maybe our programs and what we're doing, and really look at numbers to be much more intentional, so that folks can really share, sacred stories, accompany and journey. And maybe it's not just the sixth graders alone, maybe, it's with their families, and maybe there's a whole shift in how we do things. But focusing on that accompaniment as the center of the catechetical moment. I think that's really challenging, because sometimes, a program model with checking off who's present and who's not present is sometimes kind of easier. Accompaniment requires patience. It requires a lot of time, because it's not just going to take place in a 1-hour session on Sunday, or it really is going to be a journeying model for quite some time with a group of people, so that really actually challenges the larger parish. Who are we to each other? Like you said, focus first internally. Who are we to each other? And then how do we become that Christ figure to each other, and then ripple that out into the world? I think that's a great challenge for this Catechetical Sunday coming up, which is about missionary discipleship, becoming that missionary disciple.
And to deepen the encounter with Christ. That this is not just simply, I was with someone recently, and he was well catechized, well formed, and recognized that throughout his time through as a child and as a teenager. But it was when he was in a college campus ministry program that he actually had an encounter, what he recognized as an encounter with Christ. That he developed a relationship with Christ. And this is what has been emphasized, and we've been trying to emphasize as church over these last years particularly, that it's not just simply the learning that we're doing, the teaching that we're doing, but how are we accompanying so as to have that encounter? Again, back to the road. But it's not a forced encounter. It's the encounter that a person comes to over time. For this person, that breaking the bread moment came in college. All that foundational work was not wasted. It just made sense then. Because now it was within the context of this really, and now he was on fire to go out and to share faith, and now he's married and he was holding a little baby, and talking about how will I impart the faith to now in the domestic church, this family that we're now growing. And how that's been rippling out. He was telling me about how it was rippling out into his larger family, he and his wife's larger family. So it can have quite an effect as a result. So even with the classroom model, let's say, that isn't something that has to maybe completely change, but that intentionality related to opportunities to have encounter, to experience encounter, to accompany particularly, so that then students know, those who are being catechized know that there are these figures that could accompany them. And maybe there may not be people within maybe their families or within their immediate circle who would be able to do that.
Right. So this is interesting with this young man. So he received the language.
Mm-hmm.
He had the story.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the sacred story of our faith. But he didn't necessarily see it or know it in his own life as lived flesh, you know? And I think that that's the piece that missionary discipleship has the opportunity to connect. You know, the sacred story, but then the becoming and the living of that sacred story in our own self, you know, and recognizing it in another. That's the key connection that needs to be made, you know, that this isn't just a sacred story that was once a long time ago, or just with the saints, or, you know, just with a particular elite crowd. This is a sacred story that continues to unfold and that continues to be told in new ways, you know, in my own living and in my own life, in my own breaking bread. The story is not over.
Right.
The story is still becoming, and it's part of our baptismal call is to be living the ongoing story, and to have it become truth in our life, you know, like this young man. I think that that's the hope for every catechist, you know, that the language that they offer becomes the sacred story lived. But I think that witnessing of the catechist to connect those dots is a big responsibility that the catechist holds. How do they help connect those dots? How do they witness with their own life and show how to connect dots? But you're right. I mean, the story and that becoming moment of becoming the sacred story, you know, when a person realizes, it does present itself at various times in someone's faith life. You know, it's never, like you were saying earlier, it's never just once here at this time, you know, because we expect it. You know, you received a sacrament here, it's bound to happen. No, it comes sometimes in the most unexpected of ways. And I think the catechists, you know, our hope is that they accompany people to put language on that experience and to discover that experience, to maybe help provide opportunities to experiencing that aha moment. Well, Father Frank, I guess we've done a lot of exploring of missionary discipleship, and I'm so grateful for the time that we've shared. You've been a great gift to me in our conversation, and a breaking bread moment for me, so thanks.
Thank you, Margaret. It was really wonderful to be together with you, and I enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for the opportunity.